It is 4 in the morning, and somewhere out there, a person you will never meet is already awake, already moving, already becoming someone the rest of the world will meet in 10 years and not recognize. No alarm dragged them out of bed today. No one forced them. They chose it. And that single choice, repeated quietly in the dark while the rest of the world sleeps, is the reason some people's lives look completely different 5 years from now, while others are still telling the same stories they told 5 years ago. If that sentence made something in your chest tighten just a little, keep listening, 'cause what I'm about to share with you isn't about mornings. It's about who you become in the moments nobody is watching. There is a version of you that exists right now, hidden underneath the version that hits snooze, that scrolls for 20 extra minutes, that says tomorrow I'll start. That version isn't gone. It's just buried under 1,000 small surrenders you've made to comfort. And here's the part nobody tells you: comfort doesn't announce itself as the enemy. It doesn't show up looking dangerous. It shows up looking like rest, like just 5 more minutes, like I deserve a break, like 100 reasonable-sounding sentences that, stacked on top of each other for years, quietly build the walls of a life you never actually chose. I want you to think back to a moment, any moment, when you felt truly alive. Not comfortable. Alive. Maybe it was after finishing something hard. Maybe it was the first time you did something everyone said you couldn't. Notice something about that memory. It almost certainly didn't happen while you were relaxing. It happened on the other side of resistance. That feeling you're chasing, that sense of being unstoppable, isn't hiding in ease. It's hiding in the exact moments you've been trained your whole life to avoid. Most people live their entire lives negotiating with themselves. 5 more of sleep. 1 more episode. I'll start Monday. And the tragic part isn't that they fail once. Everyone fails once. The tragic part is that failing once becomes a pattern, and the pattern becomes an identity, and one day they wake up not at 40 and realize they never became who they were supposed to be, but they've forgotten they were ever supposed to become anyone at all. The dream didn't die in one dramatic moment. It died in 10,000 quiet ones, disguised as small, harmless choices. So let's talk about the mornings, because the mornings are where this entire pattern either gets broken or gets reinforced. When your alarm goes off at 4 a.m. and every cell in your body is screaming for 5 more minutes, that moment is not really about sleep. That moment is a vote. It's a vote for who you're going to be that day. The person who negotiates with their own weakness, or the person who has already decided, before the feeling even arrives, exactly what going to do regardless of how they feel. People who build extraordinary lives are not people who feel more motivated than you. They are people who stopped waiting to feel motivated before they acted. Let me tell you about the lie of motivation, because it has ruined more potential than almost anything else. You've been taught, by movies, by social media, by half-truths passed around like gospel, that successful people wake up inspired, that they leap out of bed because their passion is so strong it physically pulls them upright. That is fiction. The truth is far less glamorous and far more powerful. Discipline is what you use as motivation, and the people who reach the top are not the ones who doing the work every day. They are the ones who do the work on the days they don't feel like it, because they understand something almost nobody teaches you. Feelings are not facts. Feelings are weather. And you don't cancel your entire life because of a little rain, something that might sting a bit, but I promise it comes from a place of belief in you, not judgment. If you've spent years to feel ready before you start waking up early, before you start that business, before you start taking care of your body, before you start becoming the version of yourself you already know is possible, you are not lazy. You are not broken. You have simply been operating on faulty information. You were taught that action follows feeling. It doesn't. Feeling follows action. You don't wait to feel brave to walk into the fire. You walk into the fire, and the walking is what makes you brave. Think about a moment in your life where you were terrified to do something, speak in public, have a hard conversation, apply for something you weren't qualified for, And you did it anyway, shaking, unsure, scared out of your mind. Now remember how you felt after. Not during. After. That feeling, that quiet, steady confidence that showed up only once you were on the other side, didn't exist before you acted. It was manufactured by the act itself. Confidence isn't a gift some people are born with. It's a residue left behind by doing hard things. And the 4 a.m. wake-up call, uncomfortable as it is one of the simplest, repeatable ways to manufacture that residue day after day until it becomes the foundation you stand on. Now, I need you to understand something important. Because this isn't a speech about glorifying suffering for the sake of suffering. Waking up early isn't magic. There's no mystical power in the number 4. If you stayed up until 2 a.m. and then forced yourself up at 4, you're not being disciplined, you're just being reckless with your own body. This isn't about punishing yourself. It's about designing your life so that your first decision of the day is a deliberate one instead of a default one. Most people's days are hijacked before they even open their eyes, by a phone lighting up with notifications, by rushing, by reacting instead of choosing. The person who wakes up early, rested, with intention, has already won a small, quiet victory before the world even had a chance to throw anything at them. That victory sets the tone for every decision that follows. Let's talk about why this matters so much, in a way that goes deeper than productivity. Every single day, you are either building evidence for who you believe you are, or you're building evidence against it. When you tell yourself, I'm going to wake up at 4 a.m. and use that time to build the life I want, and then you actually do it, you are not just gaining extra hours in your day. You are sending a message to the deepest part of your mind, the part that decides what you're capable of, that says, I do what I say I'm going to do. And once that message gets repeated enough times, something shifts. You stop hoping you're capable. You start knowing it. 'Cause you have proof. Real, lived, undeniable proof, collected one morning at a time. Contrast that with the version of you that keeps promising yourself things and keeps breaking those promises. Every broken promise to yourself, even small ones, chips away at your own trust in yourself. And here's the quiet tragedy in that you'll forgive other people for breaking promises to you far more easily than your own subconscious forgives you for breaking promises to yourself. Because somewhere underneath the surface, you're always watching. You're always keeping score. And if the scoreboard shows years of, I'll start tomorrow, you will struggle to believe yourself the next time you say something big is coming, even when you mean it with your whole heart. There's a subtle trap hiding inside most people's approach to change, and it's worth naming directly. Most people try to change their behavior first and hope their identity eventually catches up. They say, I'm going to wake up early, as if it's a task on a list, disconnected from who they actually believe themselves to be. But behavior that isn't anchored to identity rarely survives the first hard week, because the moment it gets difficult, there's nothing deeper holding it in place. No belief, no self-concept, just a fragile intention floating alone. The people who sustain real change do it in the opposite order. They decide first in their mind, I am someone who follows through. And the early wake-up becomes simply one piece of evidence supporting a belief they've already claimed, rather than a lonely habit trying to survive on willpower alone. Identity is the root. Behavior, the fruit. Most people spend their whole lives trying to grow fruit without ever planting the root, and then wonder why nothing lasts. This is why the wake-up isn't really the goal. It's the mechanism. It's the small, repeatable, almost boring act that rebuilds trust between you and yourself. And once that trust is rebuilt, everything else in your life becomes easier because you finally believe your own word again. There's a story that plays out in almost every life at some point, and it usually goes something like this. Someone has a goal, maybe it's health, maybe it's a business, maybe it's simply becoming a person they can respect when they're alone. Strong. The first few days feel electric, almost easy, because the decision itself carries momentum. Then day 4 or 5 arrives, and the initial excitement has faded, and now it's just them, an alarm clock, and the same tired negotiation they thought they'd already won. Most people treat this moment as proof that the plan failed. In reality, this moment is the plan. This is where it was always going to get hard, and the difficulty isn't a sign you chose wrong. It's a sign you're finally past the part anyone can do and into the part that actually separates people. The version of you that gives up here rejoins the majority. The version of you that keeps going, tired, unmotivated, unsure, quietly joins a much smaller group. And nobody tells you in advance which group you're about to choose, because the choosing happens in silence, one morning at a time. I want to talk to you about the people who seem to have it all figured out, the ones who appear calm, focused, unstoppable, like nothing rattles them. You've probably looked at someone like that and thought, they must have never struggled the way I do. That is almost never true. What separates them isn't the absence of struggle. It's what they did with the struggle. Somewhere along the way, most of them hit a moment, a real low point, a version of rock bottom that looked different for each of them. And instead of letting that moment define them as a victim, they let it recruit them into becoming someone new. Pain either breaks people or it builds them, and the difference usually comes down to one decision made in private. Whether they chose to see the pain as proof that they were unlucky, or as fuel that meant they had nothing left to lose. You don't need a dramatic rock bottom to start changing. That's another myth that keeps people stuck. The idea that transformation requires some catastrophic event to trigger it. Some of the most powerful transformations in human history started with something as unremarkable as a person simply becoming tired of their own excuses. Not tired of their circumstances, tired of their excuses. There's a difference. Circumstances can genuinely be difficult, even unfair. But excuses are the stories we tell ourselves about why those circumstances get to be permanent. And the moment someone stops believing that story, even quietly, even without telling anyone, the entire trajectory of their life bends. Let me ask you something, and I want you to actually sit with the answer instead of rushing past it. If nothing changes, if you keep living exactly like you're living now, keep waking up at the same time, keep making the same small compromises, keep telling yourself the same story about why now isn't the right time, where are you in 5 years? Not where do you hope you'll be? Where does the current trajectory actually take you? For most people, that question is uncomfortable, because the honest answer reveals a gap between the life they're dreaming about and the life their daily habits are actually building. And that gap doesn't close itself. It closes one decision at a time, starting with the first decision of the day. Here's something almost nobody talks about honestly. Discipline doesn't feel powerful in the moment you're practicing it. It feels small. It feels like getting out of a warm bed into a cold room. It feels like closing your laptop instead of watching one more video. It feels like drinking water instead of the drink you actually want. None of these moments feel heroic. There's no music playing. No one is clapping. And that's exactly why most people underestimate them. Because our culture has trained us to expect transformation to feel dramatic, like a movie montage, when in reality it's built almost entirely out of unremarkable, unglamorous, repeated choices that no one will ever see or applaud. The people who become unstoppable are the ones who learn to find meaning in those invisible moments, because they understood that the invisible moments are where the visible results are actually made. I want you to picture two people. Both of them want the same thing: a stronger body, a successful business, a better relationship with themselves, whatever it is for you. One of them waits until they feel ready, waits until conditions are perfect, waits until motivation shows up like a wave they can ride. The other one doesn't wait. They start messy, unsure, unqualified, and terrified, but they start. A year from now, the first person is still waiting for the perfect moment, still explaining to themselves why it hasn't started yet. The second person has failed dozens of times, learned from each failure, and built something real, even if it's not perfect. Which one of these people do you think ends up closer to the life they actually wanted? The answer is obvious when you say it out loud, and yet almost everyone lives their life as the first person, because waiting feels safer than failing. But waiting isn't actually safe. That's the illusion. Waiting feels safe because nothing bad happens while you wait. But something is happening, time is happening. Your one, finite, non-renewable life is happening, whether you act or not. Waiting, pause the clock. It just guarantees that when you finally do start, you'll have less time to build what you wanted to build. The safest feeling choice is often the most dangerous one because it disguises loss as comfort. Let's talk about fear for a moment, honestly, without the usual cliches. Fear isn't your enemy. Fear is information. It shows up strongest exactly at the edges of your comfort zone, which means, ironically, that the presence of fear is often the clearest signal you're standing right next to real growth. Most people interpret fear as a stop sign. It's not. It's a threshold. On the other side of that specific fear you keep avoiding, the hard conversation, the early mornings, the relationship you know you need with yourself, is a version of you that the current version can't even fully imagine yet. Because version doesn't exist until you walk through the fear to create them. Let's talk honestly about comparison too, because it quietly poisons more people than almost anything else on this journey. It's tempting, especially in a world where everyone's highlight reel is one scroll away, to measure your first messy month against someone else's 10th polished year. You see someone who wakes up early effortlessly, who seems disciplined in every area of life, and you feel behind, like you're somehow doing this wrong because it still feels hard for you. But you're not seeing their mornings from 3 years ago, the ones where they also negotiated with the alarm clock, also failed, also started over more times than they'd probably admit. You're comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel, and that comparison will quietly convince you to quit something that was actually working, simply because it wasn't working as fast or as gracefully as it appeared to work for someone else. The only comparison that has any real value is the comparison between who you were last month and who you are now. That comparison, and only that one, tells you the truth about whether you're actually growing. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from almost living your life. Not fully failing and not fully succeeding either. Just existing in a kind of gray middle ground where you know you're capable of more, but you've never fully tested it. That pain is quieter than the pain of failure, but in some ways it's heavier, because it doesn't have a clear end point. Failure has a bottom you can push off from. Almost living just continues year after year. A low hum of unfulfilled potential in the background of an otherwise normal life. If you've felt that hum, you already know exactly what I'm talking about, and I want you to know something clearly. That feeling isn't a life sentence. It's a signal. It's your own mind telling you there's more available to you than what you're currently choosing. So what do you actually do with all of this? Not tomorrow. Not starting Monday. What do you do the next time your alarm goes off and your body begs you for 5 more minutes? You remember that the 5 minutes were never really about sleep. They're about identity. Every single morning is a small referendum on who you're choosing to be. And the person who gets up, not because they feel like it, but because they decided in advance in a calmer moment that this is who they are now, that person is quietly, invisibly rewriting their entire future. One uncomfortable morning at a time. I want to be honest with you about something else, because false promises don't build real people. Waking up early will not automatically fix your life. Discipline in the morning doesn't guarantee success by itself. What it does is give you something far more valuable than a guarantee. It gives you leverage. It gives you extra hours where the world isn't pulling at your attention, where you can build skills, build your body, build your business, build your mind, before anyone else even wakes up to compete with you or distract you. It gives you a compounding advantage that on any single day looks almost meaningless, but stacked over months and years, becomes the difference between the life you're dreaming about and the life you're settling for. Compounding is the quiet secret almost every extraordinary outcome you've ever admired. Nobody becomes exceptional in a day. They become exceptional in thousands of ordinary days that nobody was watching, stacked one on top of another, until the results become undeniable and everyone suddenly calls it overnight success. There's no such thing as overnight success. There's only invisible effort finally becoming visible. And the tragedy is that most people right before the compounding kicks in, because early progress is almost always slower and less rewarding than we expect, and that gap between expectation and reality is exactly where most dreams quietly die. There's a kind of confidence that gets built entirely by accident, simply as a side effect of consistency, and it's more durable than almost any other kind. It doesn't come from a speech, a book, or someone telling you that you're capable. It comes from a private internal record you start keeping without even realizing it. A quiet mental ledger of every morning you showed up when you didn't want to. At first the ledger feels insignificant, just a handful of entries, easy to dismiss. But somewhere around the 30th entry, then the 60th, then the 100th, something shifts. You stop needing outside validation to believe you're capable, because you have your own evidence, collected firsthand, undeniable because you lived it yourself. This is why people who'd strong morning discipline often become calmer, steadier, harder to shake in other areas of life too. The confidence isn't confined to mornings. It leaks into everything, because the part of you that learned to keep promises to yourself at 4 a.m. doesn't forget that skill once the sun comes up. Let me tell you what unstoppable actually means, because it's been diluted by overuse until it barely means anything anymore. Unstoppable doesn't mean you never get knocked down. It doesn't mean you never doubt yourself, never cry, never want to quit, never have mornings where getting up feels like the hardest thing in the world. Unstoppable means you get back up faster than you fall. It means the story you tell yourself after a setback is "this happened, not to me." It means you've built enough evidence, morning after morning, decision after decision, that even in your worst moments, some quiet part of you still believes you'll figure it out, because you always have. This is built, not born. Nobody arrives already unstoppable. It's manufactured in exactly the kind of small, unglamorous moments we've been talking about this whole time. The early alarm you didn't want to answer but answered anyway, the workout you didn't feel like doing but did anyway, the hard conversation you were terrified to have but had anyway. Each one of those moments is a brick. No single brick built the wall. But you can't build the wall without them either. I want you to think about the people in your life you admire most, not celebrities, not people you've never met, but people you actually know, people who've built something real, whose lives you respect. I'd be willing to bet that almost none of them got there by accident. Somewhere in their story, whether they talk about it or not, there was a version of them that decided to stop waiting and start building, usually quietly, usually without applause, usually while other people were still asleep, literally or figuratively. That decision is available to you too. It's not reserved for special people. It's reserved for people who decide to become special through what they do with their ordinary days. Here's the part of this conversation where I want to challenge you directly, because comfort has never changed anyone's life, but a direct, honest challenge sometimes does. What have you been putting off because you're waiting to feel ready? What version of yourself have you been avoiding becoming, because it requires giving up the comfort of staying exactly as you are? I'm not asking you to answer out loud. I'm asking you to be honest with yourself for just a moment. Because the answer to that question is usually exactly the thing you already know you need to do. Most people don't lack clarity about what they should be doing. They lack the willingness to be uncomfortable long enough to actually do it. Let's talk about the mirror test, because I think it explains this entire idea better than any theory could. At the end of each day, when you're alone, when there's no audience, when nobody's watching to judge whether you kept your word, you have to look at yourself and answer one simple question. Did I do what I said I would do? Not what I felt like doing. What I said I would do. That single question, asked honestly every single day, will do more to reshape your life than almost any strategy, hack, or piece of advice you could ever learn, because it forces you to close the gap between the person you claim to want to be and the person your actions are actually building. I know some of you listening to this are exhausted. Not lazy, exhausted. There's a difference, and I want to honor that difference, because pretending exhaustion doesn't exist helps no one. If you are running on empty, the answer isn't to force yourself into a 4 a.m. wake-up out of guilt or shame. The answer is to rebuild your foundation first. Real rest, real recovery, and then rise deliberately from a place of strength, not desperation. This isn't about punishing your body into submission. It's about respecting yourself enough to build a life where waking up early is an act of self-leadership, not self-destruction. Discipline without self-respect eventually turns into resentment, and resentment doesn't build unstoppable people, it builds burned-out ones. But for those of you who aren't exhausted, who are simply comfortable, and comfort can be its own quiet trap, I want you to notice something. Comfort feels like safety, but it rarely feels like growth, because growth almost always requires some form of discomfort. Muscles don't grow without resistance. Character doesn't grow without challenge. And a life doesn't grow beyond its current size without someone inside it deciding, deliberately, to stretch it. The 4 a.m. wake-up isn't magic, but it's one of the most honest, repeatable forms of resistance available to almost anyone, because it asks something of you before the rest of the world has even started asking anything of you yet. Think about the compounding effect of just 1 extra hour a day, used with intention. 1 hour to read something that expands your thinking instead of scrolling something that empties it. 1 hour to move your body instead of letting it stiffen with neglect. 1 hour to work on the skill that could eventually replace the job you don't love or strengthen the one you do. 1 hour, multiplied by 365 days, is over 360 hours a year, the equivalent of 9 full 40-hour work weeks, spent entirely on your own growth, hidden inside a schedule that used to be spent asleep, scrolling, or reacting. That's not a small advantage. Over a decade, that's thousands of hours that separate the person who used their mornings and the person who slept through theirs, even if on any single day, the difference felt invisible. I want to gently take apart another myth while we're here, because it quietly sabotages people. The myth that discipline is the opposite of freedom. Most people avoid discipline because they associate it with restriction, with rigidity, with a kind of joyless grinding through life. But real discipline isn't the enemy of freedom. It's the foundation of it. The person who has built the discipline to wake up early, to move their body, to manage their money, to speak honestly, to follow through on their word, that person has more freedom than almost anyone, because they're not controlled by impulse, by mood, by whatever feeling shows up first in the morning. They've built a self that they can trust to act in their own best interest, even when it's hard. That's not restriction. That's the deepest form of freedom there is. Freedom from being controlled by your own weakest moments. Contrast that will run entirely by impulse. Sleeping in because you feel like it, skipping the workout because you don't feel like it, avoiding the hard conversation because it's uncomfortable. On the surface, that looks like freedom because there are no rules. But look closer and you'll see something else. A person being quietly controlled, moment to moment, by whatever feeling shows up strongest. That's not freedom. That's just a different kind of prison, one with softer walls that are much harder to notice because there's no visible cage. There's just a life that never quite becomes what it could have been, one comfortable decision at a time. I think about legacy sometimes, and not in the grand, statue in the park sense. I mean the quieter kind, the way your children, if you have them, or the people who watch how you live, will remember the way you handled hard mornings, hard seasons, hard years. Will they remember someone who complained about their circumstances, or someone who quietly, consistently showed up anyway? Because the truth is, the people around you are always learning from you, whether you intend to teach them or not. Every early morning you choose, every excuse you refuse to accept from yourself, becomes a silent lesson for someone watching, even if you never say a single word about it. And it doesn't stop with legacy in the abstract sense. Think about your closest relationships right now, today. Think about how much of your patience, your presence, your ability to show up fully for the people you love depends on the relationship you have with yourself first. A person who is constantly disappointing themselves, constantly breaking promises to themselves, rarely has much left over to give fully to others. The self-frustration leaks out sideways, into short tempers, into distraction, into a kind of low-grade resentment that's hard to name but easy to feel. But a person who has built self-trust, who has proven to themselves morning after morning that they follow through, tends to carry a steadiness into their relationships that has nothing to do with luck and everything to do with the quiet discipline they practiced when no one else was around. The way you treat that 4 a.m. alarm clock is, in a strange and very real way, connected to the way you're able to show up for the people who matter most to you. This is bigger than you, even though it starts entirely within you. When you become the kind of person who does what they said they would do, who gets up when it's hard, who chooses growth over comfort again and again, you don't just change your own life. You change what people around you believe is possible for themselves. Proof. And proof is more persuasive than any speech, any book, any piece of advice ever could be, because proof can't be argued with. It can only be witnessed. I want to leave you with something I think about often. Somewhere out there is a version of you 5 years from now, looking back at this exact moment, this video, this decision point, this alarm clock you haven't set yet, and they are either thanking you or they are grieving what could have been. That version of you doesn't exist yet. You are, right now in this moment, actively writing them into existence or actively writing them out of it. Every choice you make from here, starting with the very next time your alarm goes off, either builds that future version of you or quietly erases them. You don't need to become a different person overnight. You don't need to wake up tomorrow and instantly become someone who runs marathons and builds empires before sunrise. That's not how real change works, and chasing that fantasy is often what causes people to quit within a week. What you need is one decision, made honestly, kept quietly, repeated daily. Set the alarm. When it goes off and every part of you wants to negotiate, remember the negotiation itself is the test, not the obstacle. Get up. Not 'cause you feel ready, because you decided in a clearer moment than the one you're currently in that this is who you are now. The world will not applaud you for this. No one is going to clap when you get out of bed tomorrow morning. There will be no montage, no music, no audience. It will feel small, quiet, almost invisible. But I need you to understand something clearly before we end this. Every unstoppable person you have ever admired was built in exactly these invisible moments. Not the highlight reel. The mornings nobody saw. The mornings where they were tired, unsure, and utterly unremarkable to anyone watching, except themselves, because they knew, quietly, that this was the moment where their future was actually being decided. So here is your moment. Not tomorrow. Not Monday. Right now, decide. Decide who you're going to be the next time comfort whispers, just 5 more minutes. Decide that you are done negotiating with your own potential. Decide that the version of you who waits for the perfect moment is finished, and the version of you who creates the moment has arrived. Set the alarm. Keep promise. And tomorrow morning, when it's dark, when it's quiet, when no one is watching, rise anyway. Because that is exactly how unstoppable people are made. Not in a single dramatic moment, but in the quiet decision, repeated daily, to become someone their excuses can no longer recognize.